Welcome to Africa Untold. Tonight, we journey into the highlands of Ethiopia, where mountains kiss the clouds and ancient stones whisper forgotten tales. This is the story of a kingdom that rivaled Rome, Persia, and China, yet was almost erased from world history. This is Aksum, the empire that built towering monuments from a single stone, ruled the seas of the Red Sea, and declared Christianity its state religion centuries before Europe. It is a story of faith, trade, conquest, and survival, a story of glory buried beneath silence. This is not just Ethiopia's history. This is a reminder that Africa was never the dark continent. Africa was light, long before others tried to dim it. Close your eyes for a moment, and picture a land where mountains kiss the clouds, valleys run deep with green, and rivers carve paths through fertile soil. This is the Horn of Africa, today's Ethiopia and Eritrea. But 2,000 years ago, it was the birthplace of something extraordinary, the Kingdom of Aksum. This land was blessed. The highlands grew fields of grain that fed its people. The rivers nourished valleys that sparkled with life. And beyond, the mountains, ports along the Red Sea, opened doors, not just to neighbors, but to entire worlds across the water. From the 1st century CE, Aksum became a beating heart of trade. Caravans snaked across its deserts and mountains, carrying Africa's treasures, ivory from the elephants, salt from the earth, obsidian sharp as glass, gold that glowed like fire, and yes, even slaves taken from inland. In return, ships sailed back from faraway coasts with riches of their own, spices from India, silk that shimmered from China, wine from the Mediterranean, and glassware crafted by distant hands. The world noticed. In fact, a Greek sailor wrote about it in the Peril of the Erythraean Sea, a guide to the Red Sea's trading routes. Even in the 1st century, he described Aksum not as a small kingdom tucked away in Africa, but as a mighty power whose influence stretched across oceans. And then came the recognition that proved Aksum's greatness. Even Rome itself, the superpower of the ancient world, acknowledged Aksum's strength. To stand beside Rome was no small achievement, but Aksum was never content with just being rich. As its coffers filled, its ambition swelled. The kingdom began to rise, not only in wealth, but in vision, power, and destiny. A giant was awakening, and the world was about to feel its footsteps. As Aksum grew in power, its kings longed for more than gold, trade, or fleeting riches. They wanted to be remembered forever, not with fragile scrolls that time could burn away, not with words carried only on the lips of men, but with stone. So, they turned to the mountains, carving from the earth itself monuments that would defy the centuries. These were the stelae, giant obelisks cut from single, unbroken blocks of granite. Imagine it, a single stone, taller than a 10-story building, weighing hundreds of tons, somehow dragged, lifted, and set upright without iron cranes or modern machines. Some stretched more than 30 meters high, piercing the sky as if challenging the heavens themselves. And these were not simple pillars. No, the Aksumite kings carved them with details so precise that each looked like a palace in stone. Engraved doors, windows stacked in rows, floors upon floors, as though entire mansions had been frozen in granite. They were not tombstones, though many stood guard over royal graves. They were monuments of immortality, symbols of kings who wanted their names carved not just in stone, but in eternity. The largest of them all was the Great Stele, a colossus so ambitious it may have reached nearly 40 meters tall. But fate had other plans. During its construction, the mighty stele collapsed, shattering the dream of completion. And yet, even in ruin, it remains one of the most audacious monuments in human history. For Aksum, these stelae were more than stone. They were Africa's answer to the pyramids of Egypt. Proof that Aksum's builders had mastered not only engineering and architecture, but the language of power carved into rock. And so, When travelers entered the capital, they did not see temples, reaching for the gods, nor towers of brick and clay. Instead, they saw giants of stone, silent, unblinking, eternal, watching over the city like guardians of memory. By the 4th century, Aksum had grown into a kingdom of wealth and stone, but its greatest transformation was yet to come. The turning point arrived under a young ruler named King Azana. Before his reign, Aksum's kings worshipped the gods of their ancestors, deities tied to the sun, the moon, the earth, and the spirits of nature. Some even experimented with Arabian influences, blending foreign beliefs with their own. But fate had chosen Ozana for a different path. As a boy, Ozana encountered a foreign teacher, a Syrian Christian missionary named Frumentius. He was no ordinary traveler. Frumentius carried with him a new vision of faith, one born in the deserts of Judea, spreading quietly through the Roman world, and now reaching the heart of Africa. Frumentius saw promise in the young king, and, through patience, guidance, and conviction, he won Azana's heart. The boy who once honored the sun and moon now bowed before the cross, and with his conversion, the entire kingdom began to shift. Ozana did not simply adopt Christianity in private, he declared it the state religion of Aksum. This was a bold, world-changing move, and here is the astonishing truth. Aksum became Christian centuries before Europe's own kings embraced the faith. The evidence of this revolution is still visible. Look at Azana's coins. At first, they carried the images of the sun and the crescent moon, symbols of the old gods, but later, coins bore something new, the unmistakable mark of the Christian cross. Each coin was more than currency. It was a message to the world. A KSUM was not following the world, it was leading it. This decision reshaped not only destiny, but the spiritual soul of Ethiopia itself. Long after empires fell, long after Rome itself crumbled, Ethiopia would stand as one of the world's oldest Christian nations, carrying Azana's choice across centuries of faith and history. But Aksum's greatness was not measured only in trade, stone, or even the cross. Its power reached beyond history, into legend. According to Ethiopian tradition, the Queen of Sheba was not an Arabian ruler, as outsiders often claim. She was Ethiopian. Her palace stood in the Horn of Africa, and her fame stretched across deserts and seas. The story tells us that she journeyed to Jerusalem, to the court of King Solomon, the wisest of Israel's kings. There, she was received with honor. There wisdom met wisdom, and from their union came a son, Menelik I. When Menelik grew into manhood, he returned to Ethiopia, carrying something beyond measure, the Ark of the Covenant. The sacred chest said, to hold the very stone tablets of the 10 Commandments, given by God to Moses on Mount Sinai. This was no ordinary relic. To possess the Ark was to claim divine favor, divine authority, and Ethiopia declared it had been chosen. Aksumite priests long guarded the secret. They claimed and still claim that the Ark rests within the city of Aksum, hidden inside the chapel of the tablet. There, day and night, monks stand watch. They never leave their post. They never abandon their duty. No outsider may enter. No eye, but theirs may behold the sacred chest. And so, the Ark remains shrouded in silence, a mystery that has endured for centuries. Whether legend or truth, the story gave Ethiopia something no other empire could match: spiritual legitimacy, written into the very fabric of the Bible. For Egypt had its pyramids, Rome its emperors, and Persia its kings. But Aksum held a claim far greater. It was not just a kingdom of men, but a land chosen by God. Aksum's power was not sustained by legend alone. Its true strength flowed through the lifeblood of empire's trade. Across the Red Sea, Aksum stood like a gatekeeper between Africa and the wider world. Ivory from African elephants, incense that perfumed temples, gold that glittered in the sun, and slaves taken from inland caravans all passed through its ports. From the harbors of Agyptus, ships carried these treasures across waters to Arabia, to India, and even to the distant shores of the Mediterranean. In return came silk that shimmered, spices that burned with flavor, glass that sparkled like crystal, and wines pressed from foreign vineyards. The proof of Aksum's reach lies buried in the soil of faraway lands. Archaeologists have uncovered Aksumite coins in India and Sri Lanka, stamped with the marks of Azana and his successors. Imagine it, a merchant in South Asia paying with a coin minted in the highlands of Ethiopia. That is the scale of Aksum's influence. Even Rome, the eternal empire, master of the Mediterranean, could not ignore Aksum. In one ancient text, Rome's writers ranked Aksum among the 4 great powers of the world, alongside Rome itself, Persia, and China. For a kingdom in Africa to stand shoulder to shoulder with giants of history, that was no small triumph. But Aksum did not stop at trade. It reached across the sea with armies. At its peak, the empire launched expeditions into southern Arabia, seizing control of the Kingdom of Sheba. The evidence remains, carved into rock, inscriptions boasting of Aksum's victories, left behind like signatures of conquest. This was no isolated African kingdom. This was an empire that commanded seas, conquered lands, and placed itself at the very heart of world history. But no empire, no matter how mighty, is eternal. Even giants fall by the 7th century. The world around Aksum was changing, and not in its favor. Across the Red Sea, a new faith was rising in Arabia, Islam. Within decades, Muslim states came to dominate the waters of the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. The trade routes that had once carried Aksum's wealth were now closed, redirected, or controlled by others. The lifeblood of the empire began to dry up. At home, the land itself began to suffer. For centuries, Aksum had farmed its highlands, cut its forests, and worked its soil. But over time, the earth grew tired. Crops yielded less, and the fertile ground turned barren. Then came the sky's betrayal. Climate shifts brought droughts. Rivers shrank, fields withered, and famine crept into the valleys that had once overflowed with grain. The empire that had commanded seas and carved monuments into stone was now struggling simply to survive. Slowly, Aksum's voice grew quieter. Its proud obelisks still stood, but they no longer proclaimed power. They became silent witnesses to decline. Its ports, once alive with ships from India, Rome, and Arabia, fell empty. Its rulers retreated from the coast, withdrawing inland to the highlands, where they clung to what remained. By the 10th century, the empire of Aksum had faded from the world stage. No armies marched in its name. No merchants carried its coins. No kings carved stelae to proclaim their glory. And yet, Aksum was not truly gone. Its spirit endured, for in its shadow rose Ethiopia's Christian kingdoms, who carried the cross of King Azana, the legends of Sheba and Solomon, and the memory of Aksum's greatness into the centuries that followed. The stones of Aksum still whispered, and Ethiopia listened. Aksum may have fallen silent, but its story did not end. For unlike Nubia, Carthage, or Mali, whose empires crumbled into the pages of forgotten history, Ethiopia endured. Through centuries of storms, invasions, and trials, Ethiopia stood firm. Foreign powers tried to break it. Armies marched upon its lands. Yet time and again, Ethiopia defied the odds. And then came the 19th century, the age when almost every corner of Africa fell to European colonialism. Kingdoms were carved apart, borders drawn with foreign hands, and entire peoples forced under European rule. But Ethiopia was different. When Italy marched upon its highlands with modern weapons and dreams of conquest, the spirit of Aksum rose once more. At the Battle of Adwa in 1896, Ethiopian warriors met the invaders with courage and unity. Against all expectations, they crushed the Italian army. This victory was not just Ethiopia's, it was Africa's. It sent shockwaves across the continent, proving that colonial powers were not invincible. For millions of Africans under the yoke of empire, Adwa became a beacon of hope. Ethiopia remained free, proud, unbroken, and within its churches, carved into rock, painted with icons, and sung in hymns, the spirit of Aksum lived on. In every festival, every cross lifted, every prayer whispered in ancient geas. Echoes of King Ozana and the Ark of the Covenant endured to this very day. Ethiopia calls itself a land of kings, heirs of Solomon and Sheba, guardians of Aksum's throne. Its people carry their history not as a burden, but as a crown. For while empires may fall, some legacies never die. And Aksum's legacy still walks in Ethiopia. Aksum was more than an empire. It was proof that Africa stood at the center of global history, a land of kings, engineers, traders, and believers. Its stones still stand. Its legends still live. Its people still carry the light of their ancestors. The world may remember Rome and Greece, but Aksum was their equal, and in many ways, their teacher. You, watching this right now, are part of the journey to bring this history back to life. Don't let this story vanish again. Like this video if it inspired you. Comment your thoughts to join the conversation. Subscribe to Africa Untold, where we restore Africa's true past. Because history was never theirs to write. It has always been ours to reclaim.